Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with a very casual, general chat about the films that are part of what's known as the Friday the 13th series, and to consider this particular moment, given that the Scream Factory box set of the Friday the 13th films was made a few weeks ago as of this video. I thought I'd take the opportunity to share with you some thoughts and comments that I have about watching these films growing up and how I feel about them now. Not in a review form necessarily, but just in a very casual conversation format. I'll be talking about spoilers, of course, so just please keep a note of that, about this film, Friday the 13th Part 3. This is from 1982, Steve Miner, and it's another film that is continuation of this plot line that we saw essentially generated or hinted at in the first film, and then really developed in the second film. That is the myth of Jason Voorhees. And that myth of Jason Voorhees, as we know, is evolved further in terms of the look and the presence. And I think perhaps this film is noted, as we all know, because of many things, but the 3D effects and the storyline and the musical theme, which is really cool, the disco theme. But it's also perhaps known for introducing the hockey mask element to the look of Jason Voorhees, which we know now is to be very iconic indeed. So in that sense, this film, Friday the 13th Part 3, is really important in the development of the series and the character and the mythology that is known even to this very day. So in that sense, this is, I think, a really significant, iconic point in the development of the story and the series. And I've mentioned it before in other videos, but the first film that I remember seeing in the Friday the 13th series was, in fact, Friday the 13th Part 3. I saw it on VHS tape. Part of the VHS rental store experience, as I was a child of the 80s, and so I grew up in the VHS rental store generation. And I was a big fan of horror and science fiction and genre films, and a part of that journey for me, as was for many other kids in my age or similar age, was to watch Friday the 13th films. Definitely, every time I would go into the store, the video store, I would always see the Friday the 13th boxes on display somewhere, and so they would always be there. And so when it came time for me to finally be able to watch a Friday the 13th film, for whatever reason, it was Part 3, perhaps because it was the only one that was available at the time or something of that sort. But for whatever reason, it was Part 3. And I remember seeing it as a kid and being so scared at a lot of the scary moments, not being able to look, peeking through, making sure I blocked out the sound because of the jump scares. And so and it was great because it was also a wonderful opportunity for me to talk with my friends about what's going on, what happened here, wasn't that so scary and cool, and that sort of thing. So it was also a means by which my friends and I got to know each other more while enjoying something that we had in common. So that was part of Friday the 13th Part 3. It's a horror film, it's a slasher film, and it's a pretty scary film, quite gruesome, very bloody in some instances. So it's certainly not for everyone. I totally get that. But as I say, this was part of my VHS rental generation cinema experience growing up, and especially because I recall it being the first Friday the 13th film I ever saw. It holds a special place in my heart because of this, and so I attach a really high level of cinematic nostalgia, affection towards this film, and I still feel that way to this very day. I should say also that there are many reasons why I think it's still a really great time. Is it my favorite film in the Friday the 13th film series? Probably not. There are other films that I think, for me, if I had to choose my favorites, I would probably select others over this film. But that's not to say that this is, to me and to my eyes, a bad film. On the contrary, it's still so much fun. And I think one of the things that is I always try to do, and I always make mistakes along the way, I admit, but what I always try to do is I always try my best to keep track of all the characters that we have met thus far in the Friday the 13th film universe. So in the first film, so Friday the 13th, we had Steve, Christy, and Alice, and we had Bill and Brenda, and then Jack, and Marcy, and Ned, and then we had Mrs. Voorhees, of course, and then people in town, Ralph and Enos, Sandy, I think, and the diner, I think that's right, and then others. And then in part two, we had Alice, of course, at the very beginning, and then 5-year jump, we had Ginny and Paul and Sandra, Jeff and Ted, and Mark and Vicky, Terry and Scott, and others. We also had Ralph and the deputy, and Jason, of course. And so I hope I got that right. And then the third film, we have another, I think, really interesting collection of characters who have a really good rapport and great chemistry between and among them. So we have, of course, Chris and the boyfriend, Rick. And we have Debbie and Andy, Chuck and Chili, Vera and the blind date, Shelley and Vera, and then we have the gang, Ali, Fox, and Loco, and then we have I guess it's the town, the store nearby, so Harold and Edna, I think, is that right? And then we have Abel, who is, I suppose, filling in the Ralph role in terms of the old man who is saying some really scary stuff. And not only that, Ralph had the bicycle, of course, but Abel, he has the eyeball. Not only that, he goes like this with the eyeball into the camera. So talk about a 3D effect, eye-popping 3D effects. If Friday the 13th Part 3 is known for anything, it's going to be known for its eye-popping 3D effects, and that has many meanings, as we know, especially for those of us who are Rick fans. So it's a good group of characters, I think, and of course we have Debbie and Andy, who are filling in the sex-crazed couple, and which is hinted at the outset. But what I like about that couple is that they are also very, I think, witty towards each other. Debbie in particular has a really good sense of humor, and it really plays very nicely, making her very likable. And so when we find out what happens to the two of them at the toward the end there, it's actually really sad, I think. There's a moment where I feel very, very sad. It's very shocking and gross and scary, of course, but it's also very sad. We have, of course, the upside down deaths. So Friday the 13th continues Part 3 continues the upside down deaths that we saw a little bit of in Part 2 with Scott and the trap and all that. So and then Debbie, of course, we have a clear homage to Fangoria, which is great, Godzilla, which is great, and Friday the 13th. So you have 3 homages in one moment with Debbie in the hammock, and wow, that's intense stuff. And it's made even more intense by the fact that she remarks early on, of course, that she's with child, she's expecting, or she's pregnant, which makes her death even more quite disturbing and tragic. It's something that I never necessarily caught on to when I was a kid. But as I grew older and watched this film as an adult and understanding what the implication of that was, it's really quite chilling and disturbing. But it's not lingered on so much so when it happens, but when we recall what happens, especially upon rewatch, it does stay with you in a very disturbing way, I think. But in any event, also, I mean, those moments I think are really quite memorable for the reasons that I was trying to explain. Then we have Shelley and Vera, and I think they also have a good rapport. I think Vera is one of those who, like Vicky in the second film, could have been the final surviving character. It really could have happened. It just so happened that this was Chris's, I guess, house, Higgins Haven, and there was a whole thing with Chris and what happened to her, and the attack that she endured, and we find out that it was actually Jason, and so she's dealing with the trauma and the stress of trying to deal with such situation. Rick isn't necessarily helping, although to his credit, he doesn't necessarily understand the background, which is why Chris has to explain it to him. But Rick is an interesting character in that he's just talking about sex all the time. Every other dialogue line that he has is something to do with sex, and he's very much he has nothing but sex on his mind. When Chris comes, and the first thing he does is essentially grabs her and kisses her like that in a very abrupt way. So, but we'll talk about Rick in a moment. But going back to Vera and Shelley, but Vera was, I always thought she could have been the final surviving character, because I think she was portrayed in such a way. She was very sympathetic. There weren't necessarily any direct traits of Friday the 13th victimness. In these films, there tends to be this outlook, this generally perceived outlook on these films. If a character is maybe engaging in casual drug use, that's probably signs that they are not long for this world, in the world of Friday the 13th and Jason. If they engage in acts of sex, if they are practical jokers, if they are hitchhikers, if they eat bananas, if they have mustaches and the like, or that sort of thing. So there tends to be this almost running joke of, it's almost akin to like Star Trek and wearing a red shirt. And so I think this film gives a lot of justification for that kind of perceived outlook, because there are certain characters that fit into that mold. Rick and Shelley, etc., and then Debbie and Andy to a certain extent, and then Chuck and Chili, of course, and then Fox, Ali, and Loco, of course. But with Vera, I always thought that she was a really well-rounded character, well-grounded. Perhaps her sin was that she essentially rejected Shelley in a pretty stern and quite clear manner. Was that what she did wrong in the universe? Who knows? And in fact, maybe that is the case, because at the point where she gets it, it's where she looks at the wallet of Shelley, and she finds something that it's a picture that is really moving to her, but then something causes her to drop it into the water, and she has to pick it up from the water, and then that's when Jason comes. The first appearance of Jason with the mask, of course. And then the arrow, phew, right there. So that's the end of Vera. But all in all, I thought she was a very well-grounded character. Maybe her other sin was maybe she was showing too much signs of being bored when Andy and Shelley are enjoying themselves a bit too much with juggling the fruit. So, but anyway, that was Vera. So, and then Shelley, of course. Shelley is the practical joker, and we've seen the practical joker character in the first film with Ned, and then the second film kind of divided into two, I think, Scott and Ted. So Scott got the brunt of the Friday the 13th-ness, as it were. And then now we have Shelley. Now, Shelley is an interesting one, because Shelley is not just a practical joker, he is also a special effects artist, it seems, because he can really create some very convincing special effects to the point where people get really scared and offended. Chris really gets offended by his practical joke, which, I don't know, I always thought well, I always thought maybe she was overreacting a bit. But in any event, there was, and then maybe there was a justification for Chris to react the way she did because of the trauma that she's reliving by visiting Higgins Haven again. But Rick and the others and Chili, and they take it a bit too seriously. I'm not sure why they do that, but in any event, Shelley. So Shelley has some gifts here. It's almost like he is a special effects artist to be, like a Tom Savini in the making, perhaps. So in that sense, he stands out from the rest of the practical Joker pack in Friday the 13th lore. So I think that makes him very likable. And also he has a really almost tragic sense of self-awareness because he knows, or he perceives himself to be not so attractive, and he makes jokes at his own expense throughout the film about, people want to go skinny dipping, but I'm not skinny, or something like that. And, oh, I'm so sorry, I disappointed you, when he first introduces himself to Vera and the like. And so he has a certain sense of sympathy. He does take the rejection from Vera a bit too hard, and he suddenly becomes quite vicious at one point. But still, there are moments where I think he gains our sympathies, or at least he did mine. And so when what happens to him, I felt really sad. I remember when I was a kid seeing that moment, I just felt so bad for Shelley. And because I thought as I say, he was a very sympathetic character. And so what happened with him and the whole thing with the neck and everything was... incidentally, that begs the question, of course, when did Jason actually get to Shelley? Because the assumption being that Jason attacked Shelley and then got the mask. And once Jason got the mask, he went after Vera, and then he went into the house, and then Andy upside down, and then Debbie with the hammock, and then Chuck in the basement with the electricity, and then after all these events, right? After some time has passed, then we discover what happened to Shelley and Shelley not believing him and all this stuff, and then what happens to Chuck, and then the lights go, and then she realizes, oh my goodness, and then that starts the wonderful sequence with her, and she goes up the stairs, and it goes down the stairs, and the door opens, and then Jason with a hot poker, my goodness, what a sequence that is. So so in any event, that's Shelley, and one of the more sympathetic practical Joker characters in the Friday the 13th universe. And I think he has a loyal fan base, perhaps, among a certain group of Friday the 13th fans, I think. I suppose the other thing, too, is the characters of Debbie and Andy. That's a very shocking moment, as I say, with Andy and upside down, and then Debbie with the thing up there and all that stuff. So that was always a very memorable moment in terms of special effects, gore, and the like. And then Chris and Rick. So here we go. So I mentioned Rick, and he seems to have sex on the brain all the time, and there's even a moment where he's shirtless and he's doing some heavy lifting in the barn and the hay. So he's entering into some creeper Steve Christie territory in a bit, although there are he tries to be in charge of the situation. So when he enters the house, you notice, the lights are off. So good for you, Rick, and goes out and tries to do a little bit of investigating, only to get Jason and the eye, right? So very memorable exit to the Rick character, and then also causes another great Friday the 13th moment in the film. Is a crash through the window of a character or something to do. So if ever there's a big window, if you see a big window in a house in a Friday the 13th film, watch out. Stay as far away from that window as you can. So, so that's what happens to Rick. And then Chris. So this is, of course, the main character of the film, if we don't count Jason, of course. But Chris, she is a very interesting character in that she is carrying a very traumatic past with her. having to do with an attack that she experienced some time back at this place. And then we find out later, of course, that her attacker was indeed Jason. And so this is her way, in essence, of fighting back against such trauma. And we therefore see the struggle that she has with Jason, especially at the very end in the barn, to be really quite momentous and very significant for her. And she fights back, of course, only to be overwhelmed once again by all the stuff that happened at the end with the lake and what happens to her, and right, it looks like Mrs. Voorhees, I guess, with head, with some things on her face as well, and and all this. This is and this causes her to go into what we assume to be a very deep level of trauma. And we're not sure if she'll be able to survive. But she survives physically. But what of her emotional and mental state? It's still, everything is up in the air by the time the film ends. But we hope that she finds a swift recovery, of course. But anyway, that's the character of Chris. And then we have other characters in this film as well. We have Edna and Harold, and complete with rabbit and toilet scene and the like. And so this is I suppose it's an interesting way to open the film, because Jason, we understand, is just recovering from the previous night's events that we understand to be part 2, and his confrontation with Ginny and Paul and Muffin, or maybe not Muffin at the very end, maybe, actually I take that back about Muffin, but Ginny and Paul. And so the next day, I think, it's where he is going to the convenience store that Harold and Edna run. And that's we understand this next day because Edna sees the news broadcast of Ginny being taken away by paramedics in the stretcher, and then then Jason comes without any sack or without any mask, but he comes and he attacks and kills the two of them. So that's a very vivid way to start the film. It's not necessarily these aren't characters that we think had anything to do with the death of Jason's mother, per se, but it's something that maybe he was trying to, I don't know, maybe work out some frustration that he had because of the events of part 2, or maybe he was just really in a lot of stress and a lot of pain, or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what Jason's motivations might have been for the killing of Harold and Edna, but there you go. There you go. And then that leads to his time in the barn, and we understand that he needs time in the barn at Higgins Haven for whatever reason, to recover, to hide out. I'm not sure exactly what, but we have to remember that if we're trying to stick with continuity, at the end of part 2, he did get the machete in the shoulder there, and so that I can, and there was some blood effect in that, so I can assume that must have hurt a lot. But he was able to seemingly recover quite quickly by the time the next day, or the next days, with the arrival of Chris and her friends. I mean, maybe there's something there's some really strong product with some strong medicinal effect at the convenience store of Harold and Edna that we're not quite privy to. But in any event, maybe if that's the case, then that was a really good store indeed. But and then also we understand that he's hiding in the barn, and he doesn't come out until he's got the mask. And so maybe he's waiting for the opportune time to get out. And for him, it's maybe hiding his face and doing so. But in the meantime, of course, we get the moments where we don't get any suspense, I think, in the film version that we get, when Vera goes into the car and drives into town after Shelley's practical joke falls flat, of course. But we do get a lot of Jason action, of course, with Ali, Loco, and Fox, and a lot of 3D action to boot. Although you have to think, my goodness, Jason was really effective when trying to deal with Loco and Fox with the rake, I think, or with the pronged thing there, and the neck, and sticking it through the guy, and he's so shocked when he's impaled that he reaches behind and feels to make sure that he's in fact impaled. That's a really great moment. And then Ali, right, the gang leader. We think he's dead, but he's not. He comes back only to become attacked and killed again. Not killed again, but killed. So my goodness, that's. But just in time, giving Chris just enough time to recover and regroup to be able to make the final attack on Jason. It's not a slow motion attack a la Alice or Ginny, although there's a bit of slow motion action elsewhere in the film, of course. But still, it's a swift attack with the axe. Another iconic moment, allowing also for the 3D effect of Jason and the hands reaching out, and of course one of my favorites, which is the axe handle sticking out, being the 3D effect. Incidentally, there are so many great and random 3D effect moments here, from the very mundane to the really outrageous and spectacular. So perhaps on the more mundane side, we have the little boy and the bat playing baseball or juggling fruit, or the yo-yo, or maybe the popcorn, chucking the popcorn. That's a great way to make and eat popcorn. Like open your mouth and have it fall into your mouth as you're making it. And Shelley throwing the wallet in the store in town. And other things of that nature. And then there are others that are quite effective and very memorable, like the little the eyeball, Abel carrying the eyeball there, and another eyeball, of course, Rick's eyeball flying through the spear going into the eyeball of Vera. So there are a lot of eyeball 3D effects here. So I don't know if anyone's ever done a tally as to which film in history has had the most eyeball-related 3D effects, but it wouldn't surprise me. I haven't done a statistical data count myself, but it wouldn't surprise me, and again, I'm speaking purely off the cuff here, but it wouldn't surprise me if in the Guinness Book of World Records for the film with the most eyeball-related 3D effects, maybe Friday the 13th Part 3 is up there in the rankings. Who knows? I'm not sure. But in any event, there is a lot of eyeball-related 3D action here. So and the like. So there's a lot of spectacular 3D effects going on here, and so it's great. It's a really great thing. This is of course the time in the early 80s where you had this 3D thing going on with cinema, especially genre cinema. So Friday the 13th Part 3D is one. Another memorable one is Jaws as well. So, but I think this did it to great effect, and it just keeps things going. I wish I could have seen this film in 3D in the theater. I would just love to have had that opportunity, but maybe one day. I'm not sure if it'll ever happen, but if ever there is the opportunity for me in my adult years, before I shuffle off this mortal coil, if I'm able to watch Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D in the theater, I would jump at the chance. But yes, and then we should go to other elements of this film, which are, I think, really fantastic. The music is just, it's rocking. It's absolutely great, in that wonderful disco theme and the dun 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 dun. One of the things that's so great about the music scores is that it's going all over the place. It's like it hits low registers and high registers, and da, 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 da. It's just it's frenzied. It's hyper kinetic. It's energetic. It's one, and this is another great one. And the da, 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 da. Oh, fantastic stuff. And then. And Jason too. Jason, this is a very important aspect of the film, perhaps one of the most important aspects of this film, right, which is the development of the Jason character. If you notice, except for a little bit at the beginning with the montage footage of not montage, but the catch-up footage with Part 2 and the close-up on the head, And then Friday the 13th, dun 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 dun, part 3, dun 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 dun, right? So we have a little bit of the allusion to what happened to Mrs. Voorhees. And we have an allusion to it at the very end with the quote-unquote the final sequence in the canoe, which is, of course, another callback to the first film. And then we have also, I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but we have Rick's sweater, which is very much similar to the type of sweater. I don't think it's the exact same design, but it's very similar in color and feel to that which Mrs. Voorhees wore, of course. But I don't know, maybe if it wasn't similar enough. Maybe if Rick had worn a slightly more similar sweater to that Mrs. Voorhees wore, maybe he could have gotten away from Jason, just as Ginny got away from Jason just at the nick of time at the end of part 2. So maybe if Rick's sweater was a bit more Mrs. Voorhees-ish, then he wouldn't have had that scene the way it did. But oh well. Maybe it just goes to show just how important sweater shopping is in this universe. But in any event, Jason. So speaking of the mother and the link, of course, the mother aspect of the Jason Voorhees myth and legend is very much integral to the presentation in part 2, as we saw, because of the references to the mother, and there's an actual appearance of the mother in a very eerie way, and the head and the climax there. Here, there is, apart from those moments, there is no mention of that kind of backstory. And so we just have Jason, and Jason being the killer. And so I think that's a very interesting development. It makes it feel like I don't know how much it progresses the richness of the mythology, but of course it does. Maybe it doesn't have to, because everything was already established in part 2, and so all we needed was a further continuation of the Jason thing, which is what he does right here. So I completely get that. Of course, we have the addition of the mask, the hockey mask, and so we have to thank Shelley for that, because we know Shelley had, I think, more than one mask. There was a bit at the beginning where we see him with a kind of clear mask. It's almost like the mask. I know it's not quite the same, but it's similar to a kind of mask we see in other films like Alice, Sweet Alice, or Terror Train, or something like. But in any event, it's very different from the hockey mask that we see later that he wears. And then, of course, we understand that Jason takes it and puts it on his own head. But this is undeniably one of the most iconic looks of any of these slasher villains. And this is the look that carries through up to this very day. So this film, therefore, becomes so crucial in that development of that part of the myth anyway, as we know. So we should thank Shelley for providing that aspect of his character. And when he does appear, no matter how one might feel about part 3, the look of Jason and how it is developed here is undeniably iconic. Oh, my goodness, great. And then, of course, we have the addition of the axe in the head and then the slit down the side there, which is an even more iconic image. And that will carry through, of course, with great effect into the next film, the final chapter. So we have a lot of setup in this film that makes it very important. Of course it does. Of course it does. So on the one hand, there's maybe is, relatively speaking, a little bit less emphasis on the mother, Mrs. Voorhees aspect of the myth, but in place of that, we get more of what ends up becoming the development of the iconic Jason figure. Now, does that mean that the sack, this is better than the sack, or whatever? I mean, I've mentioned it before in the discussion of part 2. I'm a big fan of the sack. I think it's really creepy and really effective. It would have been interesting to see the sack return in later films, but the hockey mask is the hockey mask, and you can't get around the fact that you can't escape the fact that it is just ultra iconic. So well done, Shelley. Well done, Shelley. So and of course, at the end of the day, what to make of this film in the context of the entire series. As I said before, it's not my favorite film in the series. There are other films that I would say that I could count as being my favorites if I had to make a list. But it is still so good. It's so fun. It's so scary. It's also seemingly kind of, the body count is starting to build up now, and it's becoming it's a gore fest. It always was a gore fest, but it's also becoming something of a Jason film. And so this is I think a lot of the reason why it holds up, and it's very iconic, and it is very much essential in the fabric of the Friday the 13th universe. So this is Jason. It has some great moments. He can't be alive. So great stuff. But anyway, Friday the 13th, Part 3. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.